barely slept the night before the charity gala. By 4:30 the next morning, I was already awake, staring at the ceiling of my room while my alarm hadn't even gone off yet. Every employee in the mansion knew this wasn't just another event. It was the event of the year. If anything went wrong, the entire staff would be blamed. I quickly got dressed and made my way downstairs. The kitchen was already alive with activity. The chefs were preparing breakfast for the staff before beginning the day's menu. Boxes of fresh seafood, premium steaks, imported cheeses, and desserts covered nearly every counter. Carlos looked up as I walked in. "Morning, Grace. Morning. You look nervous." "I am," he laughed. "We all are." Denise walked in carrying a stack of freshly pressed tablecloths. "If we survive today," she said, "I'm sleeping for 2 days." Even Margaret smiled. "I'll allow 1 day." Everyone laughed. For a few minutes, the tension disappeared. By 8 o'clock, delivery trucks began arriving one after another. Florists, musicians, photographers, security teams. The ballroom slowly transformed into something breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers reflected hundreds of tiny lights. Round tables covered in ivory linens filled the room. Fresh orchids decorated every centerpiece. Outside, workers placed elegant white tents across the gardens overlooking the lake. Everything looked perfect. Margaret handed each of us a final checklist. "No mistakes today." Everyone nodded. She looked directly at me. "Grace, you'll be assisting in the ballroom before dinner service. Once the guests arrive, you'll help serve drinks and keep the VIP tables organized." "I understand. You've done excellent work this week." Her words surprised me. "Thank you. I mean it. You've earned my trust." Hearing that meant more than she probably realized. Around noon, Alexander returned from an early business meeting. He entered through the front foyer, greeting nearly every employee he passed. "Good afternoon, Carlos." "Everything on schedule?" "Yes, sir." He stopped beside Denise. "How's your daughter doing after her surgery?" Denise smiled. "She's doing much better." "Glad to hear it." He remembered things like that: birthdays, family members, medical procedures, little details most employers would have forgotten. As he walked through the ballroom, he noticed me adjusting one of the floral arrangements. "It looks beautiful." I smiled. "The florists deserve the credit." He shook his head. "They arrange the flowers. You bring the room together." I wasn't sure how to respond. Before I could think of something to say, Victoria entered. She looked stunning in a cream-colored designer pantsuit. Her makeup was flawless. Her expression wasn't. She noticed Alexander talking to me. Immediately, the warmth disappeared from her face. "There you are." Alexander turned. "Everything okay? The event planner wants to discuss the seating chart." "Be there in a minute." Victoria glanced at me. "A minute?" Her voice remained calm. "But there seems to be plenty of time for conversations with the staff." Alexander looked confused. "We were discussing the ballroom." "You?" She forced a smile. "Well, I'm sure Grace has plenty of work left to do." I quietly returned to arranging flowers. Alexander gave me an apologetic look before following Victoria out of the room. The moment they disappeared, Denise whispered, "She hates when he talks to anyone else." Carlos nodded. "Especially women." I pretended not to hear them. By late afternoon, guests began arriving. Luxury cars lined the driveway. Security officers checked invitations while photographers captured images of celebrities, business leaders, and politicians stepping onto the red carpet. The mansion buzzed with excitement. Everyone moved with purpose. I carried silver trays filled with champagne glasses through the ballroom, making sure no guest waited too long. Everything seemed to be going perfectly, until I heard Victoria's voice behind me. "Grace." I turned immediately. "Yes, Miss Langford." She handed me a crystal wine glass. "This isn't clean." I examined it carefully. It sparkled. "I'm sorry, I'll replace it." She leaned closer. "Polish it now." "There are clean glasses right over." I said, "Polish it." "Yes, ma'am." I carefully wiped the glass with a spotless linen cloth. She watched every movement when I handed it back. She held it toward the light, still searching for something to criticize. Finally, she smiled. "Better." Then she deliberately brushed past me, causing several champagne glasses on my tray to wobble. I managed to steady them before they fell. She didn't apologize. She simply walked away. A nearby guest had witnessed everything. An older gentleman quietly looked at me. "You handled that well." I smiled politely. "It's part of the job." He frowned slightly. "It shouldn't have to be." His words stayed with me. As evening settled over the estate, the ballroom filled with nearly 200 guests. Soft music floated through the air. People laughed. Business deals were discussed over expensive wine. The charity auction was about to begin. Alexander stood on the stage, thanking everyone for attending. His speech was sincere. Success means very little if we don't use it to improve someone else's life. Audience applauded. I couldn't help smiling. He truly believed every word he said. Meanwhile, Victoria stood near the front, greeting guests with perfect elegance. Anyone watching would have thought she was the picture of grace. No one saw the woman the staff knew, no one except us. As the auction continued, Margaret quietly approached me. Grace. Yes, Mr. Hayes requested a bottle of the reserve Cabernet from the wine cellar. Get it. It's on the top shelf. Be right back. I hurried downstairs toward the cellar, completely unaware that the next few minutes would change my life forever. Because when I returned with that bottle of wine, one small accident, one moment of bad luck, would push Victoria past her limit, and in front of nearly 200 stunned guests, she would raise her hand to slap me. What happened next? No one in that ballroom would ever forget. The wine cellar was colder than the rest of the mansion. Rows upon rows of expensive bottles stretched from floor to ceiling, each one carefully labeled and stored at the perfect temperature. Some of the bottles were worth more than my monthly salary. Margaret had told me exactly where to find the reserve Cabernet, top shelf, third rack from the left. I grabbed the small rolling ladder, climbed carefully, and reached for the bottle. Don't let me drop this, I whispered to myself. I wrapped both hands around it before climbing down one slow step at a time. Once I reached the floor, I let out a relieved breath. So far, so good. I wiped the bottle with a soft cloth, placed it on a serving tray, and headed back upstairs. As soon as I reached the ballroom, the atmosphere hit me all over again. The orchestra was playing softly. Guests in elegant gowns and tailored tuxedos chatted over champagne. Waiters moved gracefully between tables. Everything looked flawless. Margaret spotted me from across the room. There you are. Sorry it took a little longer. No problem. Mr. Hayes is at the front table. I nodded and carefully carried the tray through the crowd. Halfway there, a little boy, probably 7 or 8 years old, ran across the ballroom chasing another child. Before I could react, he bumped into my side. The tray tilted. I tightened my grip just in time. The bottle stayed on the tray. Oh my goodness, the boy whispered. I'm so sorry. Mother hurried over immediately. Ethan, she gently pulled him behind her. Terribly sorry. I smiled. It's okay. Didn't mean to. Woman looked relieved. Thank you for understanding. She led her son away. I adjusted the tray and continued walking. Just a few more steps. That's all I needed then. Someone backed into me. It happened so quickly. A guest turned around unexpectedly while laughing with another businessman. His elbow struck the bottom of my tray. The wine bottle slipped. I caught it before it reached the floor. But the sudden movement caused a splash of deep red wine to spill from the uncorked bottle. Time seemed to slow. The wine landed directly across the front of Victoria Langford's white designer gown. Silence. Complete silence. The orchestra stopped playing. Every nearby conversation came to an abrupt end. I froze. My heart dropped into my stomach. The crimson stain spread across the expensive fabric like ink on paper. Victoria stared down at her dress for 1 second. She didn't move, then she slowly lifted her head. Her eyes locked onto mine. They were filled with pure rage. You. I immediately placed the tray on a nearby table. I'm so sorry. It was an accident. She took 1 step toward me. Do you have any idea what you've done? I'm really sorry. Can have it professionally cleaned. She laughed, a cold, humorless laugh. Professionally cleaned, she pointed at her dress. This gown is custom made. You couldn't afford to replace one sleeve if you worked for the next 10 years. I understand. No, she moved even closer. You don't. Every guest nearby had gone completely quiet. People were pretending not to stare, but everyone was watching. Margaret hurried over. Miss Langford, stay out of this. Victoria didn't even look at her. Her attention remained fixed on me. I trusted you with one simple task. I'm sorry. I said I was sorry. Oh, save your apology. Her voice grew louder. You people are all the same. The words hit harder than I expected. You people. As if I wasn't even an individual, just another servant, another nobody. I lowered my eyes. I'm deeply sorry. Accept whatever consequence you decide. She took another step. So you'll accept being fired? I swallowed. If that's your decision, she smiled. Oh, you'll be fired. Not before you learn a lesson. I looked up. What do you mean, without warning? She lifted her right hand. For a split second, my mind refused to believe what I was seeing. Surely. She wasn't actually going to hit me, not here, not in front of all these people. But the look on her face told me otherwise. Her hand swung toward my face. I instinctively closed my eyes. I waited for the sting, for the humiliation, for the sound of a slap echoing through the ballroom. Instead, I heard another sound, a firm voice. Victoria. My eyes opened. Alexander Hayes was standing between us. His hand was wrapped tightly around Victoria's wrist, stopping it just inches from my face. The entire ballroom fell silent. No music, no conversation, nothing. Victoria looked at him in disbelief. Alexander. His expression was unlike anything I'd ever seen. He wasn't shouting, he wasn't angry, but his eyes were cold, calm, controlled. "What exactly are you doing?" he asked. She tried to pull her hand free. "She ruined my dress. It was an accident. You always defend everyone except me." I saw what happened. Victoria blinked. "What?" I watched the entire thing. He glanced briefly at me before looking back at her. The guest bumped into Grace. She actually prevented the bottle from breaking. Victoria's face hardened. "I don't care." Embarrassed me. Alexander slowly released her wrist. Then, in a voice loud enough for the nearest guests to hear, he said, "No one in this house lays a hand on my employees." The words echoed through the ballroom. Several guests exchanged surprised glances. One woman quietly whispered to the man beside her. Another guest slowly lowered his champagne glass, unable to look away. Victoria's cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "You just humiliated me." Alexander remained calm. "No, you chose to humiliate yourself." Those words landed harder than any slap ever could. Victoria looked around and realized every eye in the room was on her. Without saying another word, she turned and stormed out of the ballroom. The massive doors slammed shut behind her. For several long seconds, nobody moved. Then Alexander turned toward me. His voice softened immediately. "Grace, you all right?" I nodded, though I wasn't sure it was true. "Fine." He looked at the wine stain on the floor, then back at me. "No, you've had enough for tonight." He looked at Margaret. "Make sure Grace gets something to eat and has the rest of the evening off. The guests will manage." I opened my mouth to protest. "I can still work." Alexander gently shook his head. "Tonight." I felt my throat tighten, not because I'd almost been slapped, but because, for the first time in a very long time, someone had stood up for me, not because they had to, but because they believed I deserved to be treated with dignity. And I had no idea that this moment, this single decision made in front of 200 witnesses, would be the beginning of the end of Alexander and Victoria's engagement. I couldn't stop shaking. Even after Margaret led me out of the ballroom and into the staff kitchen, my hands refused to steady. She gently took the serving tray from me and set it on the counter. "Sit down." "I'm fine." "You're not." Her voice wasn't harsh. It was the kind of tone a mother uses when she already knows you're trying to be brave. I slowly lowered myself into one of the kitchen chairs. Denise hurried over with a glass of water while Carlos placed a warm cup of tea in front of me. "Drink. Be okay," I whispered. "I know you will," Denise said softly, "but drink anyway." I wrapped both hands around the mug, hoping the warmth would calm my nerves. No one spoke for several moments. Finally, Carlos broke the silence. "Worked here 6 years. We all looked at him. Never seen Mr. Hayes that angry. Didn't even raise his voice," Denise said. Carlos nodded. "Exactly. When he gets quiet, that's when you know he's serious." Margaret sighed. "Victoria crossed a line tonight." I stared into my tea. "Feel like this was all my fault." Margaret immediately shook her head. "No, if I hadn't spilled the wine." "You didn't." I looked up. "What?" "The guest bumped into you." "I saw it." "So did Mr. Hayes." Denise nodded. Half the room saw it. "You were trying to stop the bottle from falling." I closed my eyes. For the first time since the accident, I allowed myself to breathe. Maybe. Just maybe. I wasn't imagining it. Maybe I really hadn't done anything wrong. The gala continued without me. From the kitchen, I could still hear faint applause and music drifting through the hallways. Life moved on, even though mine suddenly felt completely different. About 40 minutes later, Margaret walked into the kitchen. "Grace." "Yes, Mr. Hayes would like to speak with you." My stomach tightened. "Am I being fired?" Margaret smiled. "If he intended to fire you, he wouldn't have asked if you'd eaten dinner first." That caught me off guard. "He asked that?" She nodded. "He specifically told me to make sure you weren't sitting here blaming yourself." I didn't know what to say. Alexander was waiting in his office. The room was quiet, lined with dark wooden bookshelves and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the gardens. He had removed his suit jacket and loosened his tie for the first time since I'd met him. He looked exhausted. I knocked softly. "You wanted to see me?" He stood. "Please come in." I stepped inside, closing the door behind me. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then he surprised me. "I'm sorry." I blinked. "What?" "I'm sorry you experienced that tonight." I shook my head. "You don't have to apologize." "I do." He walked toward the window before continuing. "No employee should ever fear being humiliated while doing their job." I looked down at my hands. I really was trying to protect the bottle. I know. I watched everything. His words made my eyes fill with tears again. You believed me? He looked genuinely confused. Grace, there was nothing to believe. I saw what happened with my own eyes. You weren't careless. You were doing your job. I quickly looked away before he noticed the tears forming. No employer had ever defended me like that, not once. He reached into a small cabinet and removed a white envelope. I'd like you to have this. I frowned. What is it? Open it. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope. Inside was a check. My eyes widened. It was far more money than I'd ever held in my life. I can't accept this. You can. No, I don't deserve. It isn't a reward. He interrupted gently. It's compensation. Ruining your evening. I stared at him. My evening. He smiled sadly. You were publicly embarrassed because of something that happened in my home. I had no words. Accept it. I slowly placed the check back inside the envelope. I appreciate it. I can't. He looked surprised. Why not? Because I didn't earn it. Silence filled the office then. Something unexpected happened. Alexander smiled, not the polite smile he gave guests, not the professional smile he wore during meetings, a real smile. My accountant was right. I frowned. What do you mean? He told me you'd probably refuse, said. He laughed quietly. Anyone who turns down free money in this house is either dishonest or has too much integrity. Couldn't help smiling. Just never liked taking money I didn't work for. He nodded slowly. Respect that. He placed the envelope back into the drawer. I won't force you. If you ever need help. I hope you'll tell me. Will, even though we both knew I probably wouldn't. As I turned to leave, his eyes landed on the nursing textbook sticking out of my canvas bag. You read medical books. I looked down. I'd forgotten to take it out. Oh, I used to study nursing. His expression changed. You did, I nodded. I had to leave school. Happened, I hesitated, then decided to tell him the truth. My family needed me. My mother's medical bills became too much. So I quit. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer pity, he simply listened. I always thought I'd go back someday. I smiled weakly. But someday keeps getting farther away. He looked thoughtful. Do you still want to become a nurse? The answer came instantly, more than anything. His eyes lingered on me for a moment, then he nodded. I hope you get that chance. So do I. Neither of us realized it then. But that conversation would stay in Alexander's mind long after I left his office. The next morning, the mansion felt strangely quiet. The gala had been a success. The newspapers praised Alexander's charity event. Millions of dollars had been raised. But inside the house, something was different. Victoria hadn't come downstairs. The staff whispered quietly as they worked. Around 10 o'clock, Denise walked into the laundry room where I was folding freshly pressed towels. You didn't hear this from me. I looked up. Hasn't spoken to Mr. Hayes since last night. I froze. Really? Denise nodded. They argued until almost 2 in the morning. My heart sank. Never wanted to cause problems. You didn't. Denise folded another towel. Victoria caused them herself. Just then, the front door slammed so hard the sound echoed through the mansion. Several employees looked toward the foyer. Through the front window, I caught a glimpse of Victoria climbing into her black SUV. Her face was hidden behind oversized sunglasses. The vehicle sped away without another glance. None of us knew where she was going, but one thing was certain. The woman who had almost slapped me wasn't finished, not even close, and deep down, I had a feeling that the worst was still ahead. Victoria
didn't return to the mansion for 2 days. No one mentioned her name unless it was absolutely necessary. The house felt lighter. There was no constant fear of hearing high heels clicking down the hallway followed by another complaint. The staff laughed again. Carlos even played soft music in the kitchen while preparing lunch, something he hadn't done in months. You know, Denise said as she washed vegetables, I forgot this place could actually be peaceful. Margaret smiled without looking up from her clipboard. Let's not get too comfortable. We all knew what she meant. Victoria always came back. And when she did, she usually came back angrier than before. Friday afternoon, Margaret handed me a list of errands. Grace, Mr. Hayes is working from his home office today. Could you bring him some lunch around 1? Of course. I carefully arranged grilled salmon, roasted vegetables, and iced tea on a silver tray. Before knocking on the office door, I took a deep breath. Come in. Alexander was sitting behind his desk surrounded by stacks of documents. His laptop was open, and several computer screens displayed graphs and financial reports. He looked up and smiled. Perfect timing. I placed the tray on the small table near the window. I hope everything looks okay. It always does. He closed his laptop. You saved me from forgetting to eat. I smiled. Margaret said that happens often. He laughed. She's right. I turned to leave. Grace. I stopped. Would you mind staying for a minute? I hesitated. If you're busy, I understand. No, it's fine. He gestured toward the chair across from him. Please. I sat down carefully, unsure why he wanted me there. He picked up his glass of iced tea. I've been meaning to ask you something. What is it? How are you settling in? I wasn't expecting that. Honestly. I like it here. I'm glad. The staff has been wonderful. And the work? It's hard. But I don't mind hard work. He nodded. I noticed. There was a brief silence. Then he asked. Can I ask you something a little more personal? If I can answer it. You said you left nursing school because of your family. Yes. Do they know how much you sacrificed? His question caught me off guard. I stared down at my hands. I don't think they see it that way. What do they see? They think I'm simply doing what's expected. He frowned. That doesn't seem fair. I gave a quiet laugh. Fair isn't a word I'd use to describe my family. He didn't press for details. Instead, he quietly said. My mother used to tell me that the people who give the most are often appreciated the least. I looked at him. Was she right? A shadow crossed his face. She usually was. For a moment, we simply sat there. Not employer and employee. Just two people talking. It felt easy. Natural. Until a sharp knock interrupted us. The office door opened before either of us answered. Victoria walked in. She was wearing an elegant black dress and dark sunglasses, even though we were indoors. Her eyes immediately landed on me. Then on the untouched lunch. Then back to Alexander. So. She smiled, though there wasn't an ounce of warmth in it. I see you're busy. Alexander remained calm. We were talking. I can see that. I immediately stood. I'll leave. Victoria stepped aside without looking at me. As I passed her, she quietly whispered. This isn't over. I pretended not to hear. But every word settled heavily in my chest. That evening, the atmosphere at dinner felt tense. Victoria barely touched her food. Alexander answered only the questions directed at him. The silence between them was impossible to ignore. From the kitchen doorway, Denise leaned toward me. They haven't been the same since the gala. Carlos nodded. I heard them arguing again last night. Margaret immediately interrupted. We don't gossip about the family. Carlos raised both hands. I'm just saying. Margaret looked around the room. Everyone focus on your work. Still. Even she couldn't hide her concern. The following morning was my day off. Instead of sleeping in, I took the train across Chicago to visit my family. On the way, I stopped at a pharmacy to buy my mother's medication. Then I picked up groceries. Again. By the time I reached the apartment, my arms ached from carrying the bags. Jason opened the door. You brought food? I always do. He grabbed one of the bags without thanking me. Inside, Olivia was painting her nails on the couch. She looked up. Oh. The maid is here. I ignored the comment. I brought Mom's medicine. My mother smiled for the first time that day. Good. I was almost out. She took the medication from my hand and immediately asked. Did you bring enough money for next month's rent? I blinked. I was hoping to save a little this month. The room went quiet. For what? Dad asked. I told you. I want to go back to school. Olivia laughed so loudly she almost dropped her nail polish. Grace. Be realistic. You've got a good job. Don't throw it away chasing some dream. It's not just a dream. It used to be. She shrugged. Now you're a maid. The words hit me harder than I expected. I'm more than my job. Jason snorted. Then why are you still cleaning someone else's house? No one defended me. Not my mother. Not my father. No one. I quietly placed the grocery bags on the kitchen counter. I should get back. My mother frowned. Already? I work tomorrow. Dad looked at me. Don't forget the rent. I nodded. I won't. As I walked out the door, Olivia called after me. Oh. If Mr. Billionaire ever gets tired of his fiancée. She laughed. Tell him I'm available. Jason burst into laughter. I forced myself to keep walking. The tears didn't come until I reached the train station. As the train carried me back toward the Hayes estate, I looked out the window and asked myself a question I'd been avoiding for years. Why was I working so hard for people who only seemed to value what I could give them? I didn't know it yet. But someone else had begun asking a very different question. Why was the kindest person in his house the one everyone seemed determined to overlook? Alexander Hayes couldn't get that question out of his mind. And the answer would soon change both of our lives forever. The following week, life at the Hayes estate slowly returned to its normal rhythm. At least, that's what everyone wanted to believe. The charity gala was all over the news. Newspapers praised Alexander Hayes for raising millions of dollars for children's hospitals across Illinois. Business magazines called the event a tremendous success, and television stations replayed clips of his speech throughout the week. But there was one moment that never appeared on television. Victoria trying to slap me. The guests who had witnessed it seemed to keep it to themselves. Whether it was out of respect for Alexander or because they didn't want to embarrass one of Chicago's wealthiest couples, no one spoke publicly about it. Inside the mansion, however, no one had forgotten. Especially Victoria. She no longer shouted at me in front of Alexander. Instead, she became something far more dangerous. She smiled. Every time Alexander was nearby, she treated me with perfect politeness. Thank you, Grace. Could you please bring me some tea? I appreciate your help. The moment he walked away, her entire expression changed. One Tuesday morning, she called me into her dressing room. I need my blue gown pressed. Of course. As I reached for the dress, she suddenly said. By the way. I looked up. I haven't forgotten what happened at the gala. I remained silent. You embarrassed me in front of Chicago's most influential people. It wasn't intentional. She smiled coldly. Intentions don't matter. Results do. She stepped closer. You may have fooled Alexander. But you haven't fooled me. I wasn't trying to fool anyone. No? She folded her arms. Then why does he suddenly seem so interested in talking to you? I stared at her in confusion. He isn't. Oh, Grace. She laughed softly. Don't insult my intelligence. Before I could answer, footsteps echoed in the hallway. Alexander. Victoria's entire demeanor changed in an instant. Thank you for helping me with my dress, she said sweetly. I almost couldn't believe the transformation. Alexander walked in. Everything all right? Victoria smiled warmly. Perfect. She linked her arm through his. Grace has been wonderful. He looked at me. I'm glad. I quietly left the room, wondering how one person could wear two completely different faces. Later that afternoon, Margaret asked me to organize several boxes in the mansion's storage room. It wasn't difficult work, but the room hadn't been cleaned in years. Dust covered nearly everything. Old furniture. Holiday decorations. Family photo albums. As I sorted through the shelves, I accidentally knocked over a cardboard box. Photographs spilled across the floor. I quickly knelt to gather them. Most of the pictures showed Alexander as a little boy with his parents. In one photograph, his mother was kneeling beside him while he proudly held up a certificate from a school science fair. Another showed the family volunteering at a soup kitchen during Thanksgiving. They looked happy. Gentle hands. The familiar voice startled me. I turned around. Alexander stood in the doorway. I'm sorry, I said quickly. I didn't mean to knock the box over. He smiled. It's all right. He walked over and picked up one of the photographs. My mother insisted on keeping every picture she'd ever taken. He laughed quietly. I used to complain about it. I smiled. My mom never kept many pictures. He looked at me. Really? We couldn't afford cameras when I was little. He stared at the photograph in his hands. My mother believed memories were life's greatest investment. I noticed the sadness in his eyes. You miss her. Every day. If you don't mind me asking. What happened? He was silent for several seconds. Cancer. I'm so sorry. So am I. He carefully placed the photographs back into the box. She never got to see the company become successful. I'm sure she'd be proud. He smiled sadly. I hope so. Then he looked at me. You remind me of her. I blinked. What? She always treated everyone with kindness. It didn't matter if they were CEOs or janitors. I didn't know what to say. No one had ever compared me to someone they loved. Especially not someone like Alexander. Before leaving, he paused. Grace. I've been meaning to ask. How much longer would nursing school take if you went back? The question caught me completely off guard. I think about 2 years. And you've never applied again? I shook my head. I can't afford tuition. He nodded thoughtfully. I see. That was all he said. But as he walked away, I noticed something unusual. He looked deep in thought. The next evening, after finishing dinner service, I stopped by a small neighborhood bookstore on my way to visit my family. In the clearance section, I found a used nursing study guide for $15. I smiled. It wasn't new. Some pages were highlighted. The cover was slightly worn. But it was exactly the edition I'd wanted. I bought it without hesitation. When I reached my parents' apartment, I couldn't wait to show them. I found this today. I placed the book on the kitchen table. I'm thinking of studying again in my free time. Olivia looked at the cover and laughed. You're still obsessed with that? I'm just reviewing. For what? So I'll be ready when I can go back. Jason shook his head. What a waste of money. It was only $15. Mom frowned. $15? You could have bought groceries instead. I already brought groceries. Dad looked at me over his glasses. Grace. When are you going to stop chasing impossible dreams? I stared at the book. I don't know. Maybe when they stop being my dreams. The apartment fell silent. No one encouraged me. No one smiled. Instead, Olivia pushed the book back across the table. You know what your real problem is? What? You keep forgetting who you are. I looked at her. You're a maid. Not a nurse. Those words stayed with me the entire train ride back to the Hayes estate. I held the study guide tightly against my chest and quietly whispered to myself. One day. I'll prove you wrong. What I didn't know was that someone else had already decided to help make that dream possible. The very next morning, Alexander Hayes would make a phone call. A phone call that would quietly change the course of my future. Without me knowing a single thing about it.